So I think this conversation kind of ties in to a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. Um, we're still in the middle of building our capacity around fundraising, connecting the dots financially, and identifying resources for our organizations. Where we left off last time we were together in January was talking about how our dollars are broken down. We talked about the biggest revenue sources. Most nonprofits includes 80% between private fees for services and government contracts and grants. And it's kind of apropos that we're kicking off our conversation identifying some of the pain associated with it. Um, it doesn't suggest or mean that all funding comes from government, but for some organizations, there is an outsized dependency upon government funds, whether it's local, state, or federal. This speaks to kind of a broader conversation around sustainability, and where I am going to conclude the presentation today around systems, because as constructed, we're designed to pursue opportunities that are proposal based, RFP based, contract based, grant based. The mechanism and the behavior of pursuing funding for most nonprofits will require an ongoing engagement in a proposal. So as things are shifting at a federal level, one of the things that I've been hearing that I'll share with you guys is while there are cuts and will be cuts in things as we know it, it creates opportunities in other spaces that are not considered or being thought about in the moment. It's the same thing around careers and jobs that folks have long been concerned about the advent of technology, and how it stands in the way of jobs as we know it, but it just creates jobs in other spaces that requires individuals to upskill and to participate in the economy. So I want to continue where we left off. I'm going to use the same format. I'm going to share a bit, and then we're have conversation and jump into the activity. If you haven't gotten yourself a booklet, let me know. But in the case of understanding your revenue, and all of you are interested in increasing revenue, yes? I only heard one yes. So maybe it's just one person in this room. Everybody needs more money. So the question perhaps to ask is, do we or should we increase revenue by way of more staff, new staff? Does that guarantee more revenue? Okay, so we have some emphatic no's. Why do you all say no? New staff, here's the premise of the question and the responses we got. New staff does not guarantee new revenue. The response was no. Why do you say that?
Well, just hiring the staff. If I don't have a money source for it, what is it? How does that give me money? So, like in my programs that I have right now, I can hire a bunch of staff, but it doesn't help us with the bottom line.
Right. Okay.
So you have to do it. If you said hiring because we have a new grant or a new revenue source, that would make sense. But just hiring new staff just for the fun of it doesn't make any sense.
Okay. Yeah.
For me, I think it's going to free me up to be able to seek more.
Okay. You want to explore that more before others jump in?
I'm doing everything right now, and so things are gonna. I just don't have. There's just only so much one person can do. So, um, I think you have. I'm just like to say you have to, guys have to, we have to. Um, set ourselves up to be able to be to do what we have to do and have our systems. And so that's just something that I'm working on struggling and um yeah, I don't know.
I think that small nonprofits, you have to wear many hats. So I think you can't accomplish everything doing it yourself, but you also might hand it off to somebody who you're only going to be upset with because you're going to think, I could have done it better than them. But then are you even going to get to it? You know, if you say a long to-do list, think talent is everything, and then also passion. So you can either hire people that are not very passionate about the cause, or you can have volunteers that have no interest in the cause, or just like helping you out as a friend or a family member. But it doesn't mean that it equates to a good output. And I think that you can take that big leap of the first person being the development officer that you hire or the coordinator. But it doesn't mean that if they aren't talented, they aren't going to have good results. And it's a huge risk to hire somebody to then just shell out additional money with no return.
Yeah.
The I find sometimes process improvement, it's not necessarily staff that you need, but technology is a critical piece, automation. Um, Simple example was working with our business owners, and it's hard for them to come in and sign a document. And it was like the light bulb went, what about DocuSign? Right? And so from that perspective, I didn't need more staff. I just needed to pay $100 a year and get DocuSign, and my clients are happy. So yes, there's a place for staffing, but you have to make sure that it benefits, the cost benefit ratio is there, and you're not, because technology will be there, but when we face a situation like this, it's a downside.
Mm.
It depends on whether you're starting up your operation or whether you are evolving to a different level in terms of maturity. So staffing for me is not always the right role.
Mm. These are, I think, credible responses. And I think as business leaders, it is important for us to know the response that we ought or should give to that question. And the question on the floor is, if we're looking to increase revenue, does adding more staff help us get there? I think there's a generic yes, right, that we can lazily apply to that question. But I think you guys have given kind of a specific response that says, but there are caveats to this. So let's unpack some of the caveats here. When we are talking about grant seeking, and we can replace grant seeking with uh, contracts, opportunities where we have to compete and submit a proposal. What we've learned,
Is there, I'm just wondering if there's a same place in this that in your, your portal thing where we can be following these or not?
I'm not logged in. See, on the left-hand side, is there a link to the book or presentation? The, does it say bottleneck breakers?
Say what?
Does any of the links on the left hand say bottleneck breakers presentation?
All right, I'll look. I won't.
Oh, okay. So it should be in there. If not, let me know. So when we look at the challenges of pursuing opportunity, here's what the data has said that stands in the way for most organizations, and why they find it difficult to pursue opportunities. Here's the largest impediment to getting out more grants, getting out more proposals. Number one, 24% people say there's a lack of time and staff. Well, that's interesting because the previous question was, do we have enough staff to do X? All right. Let me see if I can zoom in here for you guys. It is a question that is constantly going through the mind of CEOs and leaders. 24% say we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough time, which is interesting that it's categorically connected. Staff time is connected. You heard Myrna say, I can't do it myself. You're on staff. And so, as a limited resource, there's only but so much I can do. So, let's continue to see what the feedback says. People have said the reason why we can't get out more proposals, we can't compete, or we don't have capacity. Number two is funder practices and requirements. So, it's the funder's fault. It's the funder standards. So, prior to me putting this presentation together, this data has been around for several years, right? We didn't have the circumstances we have now at the federal level. And the federal government and their subsequent agencies act as funders in this case, in this conversation. Now, there's a part of the presentation that says, yeah, but I mean, you can't bet on funder behavior as a mechanism for why you can't do something. And I still think there's a significant element of truth to that. However, this data, it looks a little different now. When you start to look at changes at the federal level, cuts to key departments that are funding you, staff that has supported you that's no longer present or around, budgets that were pretty large now have shrunken down. Yeah, funder practices and requirements, expectations, it can cause a shift, right? For some organizations, because we've lost a commitment of funding, well, we've already cut staff. And that cutting of staff may have resulted in, oh my goodness, we're going back to the top, no staff, no time to pursue opportunities, even if we think we're a good fit. All right. So other data says, and this data came from nonprofits around the country, we have a hard time researching and finding opportunities. We don't know the right sources or places to get leads. Does anybody have that problem in this room by chance? You don't know the best places to get leads. We got one. We don't know credible platforms to get leads. We don't know how to search. Anybody else have that problem? One? Anyone else? So very few
Subscribe to various, right,
platforms. So you got databases. You do too. So you have some challenges. You have challenges. What about you? You're good. What about you? You're good. All right. So it's not the majority of the room, which kind of corresponds with this 14%, right? It's not a large thing. Let's see. Others say competition, right? It's too competitive. The sandbox is too small. I mean, we all can say that and have that argument. It's always going to shrink. It's going to be ebbs and flows. Sometimes competition, you know, is an issue, but not always. We got funder relationships. Anybody has a challenge with having, developing, building, maintaining funder relationships? One,
Yeah.
two. Anyone else?
and I'm on the front end of that.
Two and a half. All right. So let's define funder relationships. How would you all describe having a successful relationship with one or all of your funders? How would you define that?
Keep them apprised what's going on.
Okay. Stay up to date.
Yeah.
Unpack engaged.
You can do newsletters, you can do personalized letters, you can make them a volunteer at the events, make sure they're in photos, and then you follow up with thank you letters with the photo of them at the event. You engage with them post fact, whether it's weeks, months, a whole year later, saying, hey, reminder that thing is coming around again, we'd love to see you there.
Okay, got it.
I,
Okay.
so it depends on the experience that the funder or funders have or had with their organization.
Okay.
And so for me, coming in, there were some damages that needed to be repaired,
Sure.
that determined whether the organization get funding or not.
Yep.
So it's knowing who the stakeholders are within the organization that's gonna advocate or not advocate with that roundtable conversation that's who to funding. So I find it a huge piece.
Mm-hmm. Others, how do you develop, maintain a solid funder relationship?
Regular communication or acknowledging them on social media.
Acknowledgement. Okay. And when you say regular communication, what does that mean?
Letting them know what thing, how things are going, within the requirements of the grant that they would like to know.
So reports and whatnot.
Maybe once in a while, even invite them over to see how their money is being spent.
Site visits.
Yep.
Good old site visits. All right, others. I think you can already say something. Abdul.
No, the way I see it, we're in communication with the funding. I mean, like, we have like weekly meetings, in some cases, multiple meetings, touch points where we're gonna talk about our program with them. I think there's different types of funders too, so you have ones that are like state agencies, where like, when I think about the DCF and DMIS who we work with, we're meeting with them. It's not like they're a funder, like, we have a grant where it's from, the state representative, the state senator. So that one is more like we have to, put it on social media, we have to shoot, take pictures, but the other ones that are like, uh, contracts,
Mm-hmm.
it's just do the work, and when we come to the meeting, have the information that they wanna have so that we're able to continue moving forward. And it's basically like making sure that we're doing a good job. We're having positive outcomes for our young people that we serve, or positive outcomes for whatever the program is that we're offering.
Awesome. Any other contributions to that question? How do we maintain, build, funded relationships?
I think depending on the size of the organization, you can give them a seat at the table.
Meaning what?
Um, Either a board spot, a community member like stakeholder seats, or an advisory board role. I think it gets a little sticky when it's a smaller organization. I think that you should probably recuse yourself when certain votes come up, but I think more often than not, they actually really love being at the table.
Got it. Others? Anyone else?
Because when with a new kid on the block, um, fortunately for us, our state representative is actually on our board.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of having access to other state agencies, whether they provide grant funding or direct support, uh, potentially can be an advantage for us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think because of people on the board have extensive relationships throughout the city and the state, it becomes more important for us to be able to, one, produce a product for them that they will back. Put on your website, say, hey, we funded this organization and this is what they've been able to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
But I think long term, I'm not sure where we're headed long term. And
Got it.
just thinking through the process that right now we're a project-based sort of organization. And I'm not sure if we're able to get the project completed,
Mm-hmm.
go from there. So I'm not sure we want to grow, provide more services. Right now we're just focused on building houses. The state itself is focused on building more affordable houses. So we're in accordance with what the state mission is. So we think that maintaining those relationships with state and local officials is going to help us at least, stay in the pipeline for both local, state, and hopefully federal funding as well.
All right. I want to park there for a moment, because I think these are somewhat self-explanatory, right? People say the reason they don't go after more grants, they need a grant specialist, which in my business, call me if you need a grant specialist. I'm always open for business and new customers, so can't argue with that. Putting together the proposals, internal org issues. So you have drama within the organization that can create issue, reduce funding. We've just talked about economic conditions. We just talked about other challenges. I want to park here before we go to the next page here. For the relationships, you guys have shared what I consider low-hanging fruit items that I don't disagree with. Everything you talked about low-hanging fruit to me. You mentioned newsletters and volunteer opportunities, providing updates responsive to reports, repairing reputational damage, which I think is there's a lot to unpack there. Site visits, board seats. Those things are low-hanging fruit in my mind. Those are things you ought to be doing. I don't think that data speaks to low-hanging fruit issues.
You don't think what?
It speaks to low-hanging fruit issues. I think it's several steps deeper than that. I have three things that I wrote down that you guys did not say that helps build, strengthen capacity amongst yourselves, amongst organizations, but also ensures that you're making progress towards building a relationship with your funders. Number one, being responsive to their communications within a timely manner. Now, I have my current client, one of my current clients list, one of their beefs with some of their fundees is a lack of responsiveness in a timely manner to requests. Now, this may blow your mind. What are some of the requests that comes from them? Requests for data, requests of acceptance of new grant opportunities in cash. Now, everybody in this room literally said, we need more money. All right. She gave an announcement that there may be a cutback from current funding sources, but things change. So there may be new opportunities. If new opportunities come online with LISC as a funder or any other funder, how responsive are you to raise your hand and say, yes, I'm in. Here's the information you requested to move the ball forward, et cetera, et cetera. The lack of response does not build trust.
Yeah.
It builds skepticism.
Mhm.
And I'll say that these two ladies, I told Jim this the other day over lunch, they've been well over backwards for some of the grantees, which I think is unnecessary to try to get money out, and it still doesn't work.
I think the literal title of this whole cohort is a reason why I do not pursue additional funds for the current organization I'm with right now because of capacity. Like we're after like a grant here or there for hundreds of thousands or $1 million, and it's slow down. Like we're going from you've never had a funded executive director of one, and now you want to go to five in under a year. Like that's a massive jump. Like there are so many things to the point of those two women down there to say like, no, we have like HR compliances that we have to like get on top of first before we decide to expand and grow so fast. So when I see some advantageous or exciting fruits of new funding, I'm like, maybe we should slow down. Hold on, like what are the steps that are going to be taken prior to that grant? Who's going to be filling out that grant, and then how are we going to implement it after that?
It's interesting, which leads to, again, 24% lack of staff time on your part. Board members are not staff, right? If we were at church, I would ask for amen. Board members are not staff. Volunteers are not staff. I I have epic rants on volunteers that I've shared with my students at the university on my podcast. They are not staff. I don't believe in volunteers as a mechanism to build capacity. There's nothing, there's no obligation between a volunteer and your organization that's going to make them show up tomorrow at 9 o'clock and the next day at 9 o'clock and next week at 9 o'clock. You're dependent upon goodwill and somebody keeping their word.
Yeah.
That's a super high investment to make. That will It's a dangerous investment and it will let you down just about every time. All right. So I see your situation differently, but I respect where you're coming from because I think the way you just framed that gives me a different view of why you're saying what you're saying. I think being an old dog in the business, I see it a little different, but I get what you're saying. And it still comes down to lack of staff capacity. So we talked about one of the ways to build a relationship with funders is to be responsive. And to your point, if you are overcommitted with not enough staff or not the right staff, you end up not responding at all, missing an opportunity that was really easy money, and then knocking on Debbie and Casey's door saying, "Hey, is it still there?" And we've been waiting for you for 6 months. It's gone. This is absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. That was the first one. Here's the second thing. This is If you asked me what we do through our business, there are many catchphrases I could use, terms I can use, but here's one that I stand by. We work really hard to help our clients meet deadlines. In fact, we work really hard to help our clients be ahead of schedule, right? It's what we offer, this is what we sell to our customers. One of the biggest pain points for our customers, which are primarily nonprofits, is that nonprofits are notoriously late. I mean, it goes back to the first point, notoriously last minute, notoriously overwhelmed by whatever, and they end up missing easy deadlines, not just for grant money, reports, communications, applications, etc. I had this conversation with one of my colleagues last a couple weeks ago. Well, why is it that we as an industry we do that? And this person shared with me an interesting perspective, and their perspective was It's because we lean into the grace element that comes along with working for a nonprofit, or some people call it a charity. They don't have resources. It's okay that they be late. And we depend upon inherently and probably unconsciously that grace that oftentimes really doesn't work. So we end up missing tons of deadlines. Anybody has experienced a grant application due 12 o'clock midnight and you submit it 11:59 p.m. And it happens over and over and over again, where you just running up against the deadline and you're breaking your neck to get it there. Anybody ever experienced that? Anybody do? Is it a repeat thing where you're always just up against it? Oh, this is due in like 2 hours. Then you cancel all your meetings, and then you miss that just to get an application in. It is a normal behavior, unfortunately. It breeds mistrust. It breeds disconnect between you and your funder when you're always up against it. The last thing is one of my favorite things to share and teach, to build relationships. I want to preface by saying this. If we believe newsletters, email updates, reports, invitations to site visits are and social media announcements are ways to build relationship with funders. And I commented that that's low hanging fruit. Imagine one funder who gets those same newsletters from X number of organizations. At some point, it becomes noise in the email inbox. The tags become noise in your social media inbox. The calendar invites become conflicts where I have a meeting to attend to. I'll see you next time. Maybe next time. So there has to be something else you do that takes your funder away from the noise. And this is something that I deeply believe in, and that is taking your funder out to coffee, getting them out of the office, taking them out to lunch, breakfast, coffee. Coffee's a cheap date. It's $3, right? Or tea, whatever the case may be. It is a way to pull someone out of the office to break up their day. It's an intentional act to say yes, for the funder to say yes, and for you to have uninterrupted time with that person just to talk. Just to talk. You'll be surprised how a cup of coffee will bring you closer to a funder than a newsletter will. They'll remember the conversations over coffee. But what do we talk about? Talk about everything. So I'm gonna give you a general idea of how I structure a 60-minute coffee. Do whatever you want. Notoriously, and you and I've done this many times over. If we have a 60-minute meeting, 90-minute, whatever the case may be, the first 50 minutes, maybe 55 minutes of that coffee is talking about life, catching up, learning about people, learning about what's going on behind the scenes of their life. And the last 5 minutes ends up being about business. Oh yeah, hey Abdul, I need a favor. Can you look that up for me? Because it's about relationship. Um, I'm open up for questions in a moment. I give this as an example. Every time I see Casey, I ask about two people, or two, let's say, people in her life. One's her dad, because I remember she had to travel up to New Hampshire to go visit him. He wasn't doing well. Second person is her dog, because her dog is older, is sick constantly, and takes up time, and it worries Casey and her husband. Now, here's a rhetorical question. How do you find that information out if you don't spend time with that person, but you keep it behind a firewall of newsletters or reports? Or you walk into this capacity session with your two funders at the end of the table, and all you do is say, "Hey," and sit down. Where's the relationship?
Can I,
Yeah, let's unpack that.
thinking about as you were talking, I feel like COVID has had an impact on.
Hmm.
I think that we talk about staff, the staff aren't the same. Like staff now, before COVID, on average, I might have a staff stay with my agency for 5 to 7 years. Now it's more like 5 to 7 months. They're always looking. They're looking for something where they can make $1 more, they can make whatever. They just, I feel like that's how I feel with my staff.
Mhm.
Do you find that across generations?
Well, I have some people that have been with me a long time, but I'm just saying, like, if I hire somebody today, in the past, they wouldn't be going anywhere for quite a long time.
Mm.
Now, they're looking for something else. This is just like this temporary, especially the young. I mean, a lot of people we're bringing in are younger. Some of the older people they might get comfortable, but young people, they're out.
Mm.
That's what they're chasing the dollars.
Yeah, yeah. But I feel like before COVID, I used to have tons of young staff, and they grew up in my agency. Like they went from being a 20 something to a 30 something in my agency. And so like the loyalty, I don't see it the same way as it was before. I think the other thing about funder relationships, I think I like what you were saying about the coffee. I mean, I think also with COVID, like I'm like a person that I'm really good in a room. Like, when I'm seeing the people, talking to the people, and it's like we're not even, like you said, talking about business. It's like, I would go to DCF and I'm just in there like, shaking hands and kissing babies. I'm just in the room. And so and then that leads to the money some way, somehow.
Mhm.
And so it's like when you're talking about this, like my whole thing over the time of my business has always been like I may not get a contract the traditional way. I might just get a contract because Dual could probably do this. And so I think that I'm hearing what you're saying, but I think that um there are a lot of different ways you can be able to kind of get to where you're trying to get to
Mhm.
when you're able to build those relationships
Absolutely.
in a with the right people who have
Absolutely.
the power to sign off on something.
Absolutely.
I mean, we did our first written contract about a year ago, and whoever we sent it to, they called me up and told me it was terrible. They're like, they said your contract is terrible, but we still got the grant. And so it's like one of those things where the relationship was greater than what we wrote on the paper because they know what we can do, and they said, well, why didn't you put what you could do into the writing? And so that made when we used the company to do it, they didn't do a good job. But maybe but ultimately it's like you just graded me, but you still gave me $1 million.
Mhm.
So what am I supposed to do?
I think it's a both and. Well, I think one, you didn't call Eli Patrick for your grant writing needs, right? That was a plug. Y'all supposed to laugh. Okay, got it. Thank you. Um, but I think to an excellent point you're making, it's both and.
Mhm.
There has to be excellence in the area of low-hanging fruit, and grant writing would kind of fall under that category. And then there has to be excellence in one-on-one combat when it comes to relationship building. It's not one or the other. Because you can be like Abdul and get an opportunity because of who you are. I've seen this too many times where that has happened, and then the ball is dropped on the easy stuff, like program execution, program design, reports, deadlines, etc. It's easy to get the money. It's harder to keep it, and it's harder to flip it for the next opportunity. And here's what I tell you, all of it impacts relationships. The three secrets to raising good money, the three secrets to being effective, the three secrets to success in this business. Number one, the slowest way to raise money is through strategy. This entire 12 months together is a long way around developing a strategy. That's what they pay for. That's what lists pay for because it takes time to unpack your mind and then develop new approaches. Strategy takes time. Slowest way to raise money. Second fastest way to raise money is through performance. So performance by way of program, by way of the low hanging fruit, reports how you show up at meetings. Do you show up at all? Do you communicate? Do you write good proposals? Do you execute on what you promised? And if you don't, it hurts you in the long run. I tell a lot of my clients this principle, the 30-90 rule. Within the first 90 days of your new fiscal year, you should have accomplished 30% of your commitments to your funders. 30-90. Here's why. If you don't do that, let's start with July. Most folks have a fiscal year that starts in July. July, what happens? There are vacations, people out on summer trips, 4th of July, etc. Got July, August, and September. What happens in September? Back to school, back to college. Parents are distracted. Before you know it, it's September 30th and you've done absolutely nothing. So now we're going to try to get going October 1st. Here's a problem. What's due October 1st?
The report.
Your first quarterly report. And what's on the quarterly report? 0. Okay. October comes. You start to get some momentum, but unfortunately, 6 weeks later, you lose your momentum. Why? And
Christmas.
well, not yet. Got Thanksgiving, you got Black Friday, we got travel. So then, what happens after Thanksgiving, between Thanksgiving and Christmas? Nothing. Okay. Then after Christmas, we have,
You have to recover from Christmas.
and couldn't say it better myself. We got to recover from Christmas. We got to recover from credit card debt, buying all this stupid stuff. We got to fly back home. It's New Year's. And then it takes about a week after New Year's for everybody to get settled back into their positions. But unfortunately, what's due January 2nd? And what's likely on the report? 0 or very little progress. What else is happening around January, February? Ooh, grant release. And what do you think funders are thinking about around January, February? Similar to what he said earlier. You know, RFPs are getting ready to come out in March-ish. They're thinking about who to invite. I may not want to invite so and so, but what if they get a hold of the RFP anyway? I have an idea of who I think will win the award, but it's certainly not going to be so and so because they're not performing well. So you do all this work and you submit a proposal. And like most organizations, like I said, we miss deadlines, we're last minute. We start to burn the midnight oil around March, April, May, and the first half of June to get all of our results in 4 months. Absolute insanity. We spend down unspent money, which is part of your reports. We try to get all the results. We try to recruit all the people we need to recruit. We bribe people. We give out stipends. We do everything we can do, pizza parties, everything to get results in, all to learn that we're not invited or we lost funding. And it's because we don't perform well. 30-90. Versus if you started in July 1st, hitting 30% of your goals in the first 90 days, you only have what, 60% left to do. And then you keep on going. By the time you hit Q2, Q3, you should be done because you've built confidence between you and the funder that you can do the work because there's this systematic approach to the work as opposed to a last dash. So strategy, slowest way to raise money. Second fastest way to raise money is performance. And I tell my clients all the time, you can shut off or turn on the faucet of funding 2 years or 1 year in advance by how well you perform or don't perform. And then the fastest way to raise money is how? Relationships. Now you have a leg to stand on when you go have coffee. A funder has a concept that they are exploring, and they need an organization to execute on this concept. Who do you think they're going to call first? The person to have a coffee with. And oh, by the way, we have the results to prove it too. We don't let the reports go by the wayside, but we do that stuff. We perform well, and I know how to be interpersonal. That's why I'm sharing with you. It's both and. I want to continue to unpack relationships. Yeah.
The timeline that you're speaking of makes sense, and I'm wondering when I translate that to our situation, I'm not quite sure how that translates because it's depend like the acquisition of properties, the relationships that are in place, the partners that are creating, their portions and all of that, it's like, I don't see exactly when it's going to turn out, like great certain circumstances turned out, like right now that we just had some great, like, wow, renovation moments on this building that we're working on. But it's not, it's not perfectly timed like that. Like, it's like which relationships, what's happening. I don't,
Oh, the release schedule of your contracts, RFPs, and grant opportunities?
oh,
Okay.
because we're a community land trust, right?
Sure.
So, yeah, it's just, I don't know, I don't understand the timing portion of it. I guess it could make more sense if it was, let's say, a school. It's very structured. You start at this day, you end at this. We could just plan certain things for
Sure.
so-and-so date.
So that's a great example. So I guess my quick response would be to study the cycle of your normal funders, right? If you have a steady portfolio of funders you work with on a regular basis, there has to be a cycle, whether it's an annual cycle, a biannual cycle, whatever the case may be, right? There has to be a cycle. One of the things we do for our customers,
No, without programmatic outcomes.
Mhm.
30% of it done within the first, did you say 30 days?
90 days. Okay, so you're talking about, okay, so if you have a 2-year, 3-year contract, you just do the math. Like, it's not pushing you to do something that's unrealistic. That math is based upon a 12-month cycle. But if you have a 24, 36-month cycle, the concept's still the same. The reporting schedules are pretty much still outlined by your funder. And at the end of the day, it's incumbent upon you who, to make sure you're planning accordingly.
It sounds like you do something, what you're saying is you're doing something different. Like if you're fixing up a house, the time schedule isn't the same as getting a contract. It's like your outcomes are gonna come when you're able to complete the job, when you're able to get
Right.
pieces of it done.
Right, and then there's so many factors of, which contractor is doing what. You don't know what timeline they're necessarily going to give you at the first contract, or buying a house. I don't know when Stanley is gonna, his credit score is gonna be ready for us to then therefore go to Keith, the mortgage lender, and Keith has, whatever, all of those pieces that, um, I mean, for me, what I heard is like my own translation to it, therefore, from what you said is, Myrna, you're just gonna have to highlight, like, what are those pieces that are coming out in the first 90 days.
Sounds like more like the storytelling side of it.
Yes.
To not be,
Yes.
not to be crude, but like making it sound sexy.
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
like,
That's what I took away.
one of the major issues of like Hartford Next and the things that we were actually founded on was blight and like blighted properties in Hartford. And when you think about the hundreds, like let's say under 1,000 properties that are all blighted, you're just like, oh, that's terrible and disgusting. And like, how do you look at that versus like diving into one of our neighborhoods? The leaders of that neighborhood created a really, in my opinion, very pretty spreadsheet that listed all the properties within their neighborhood, and they had a little photo attached to each one. They had address and little notes. I was like, "This is an amazing spreadsheet." And they're like, "You?" I was like, "No, this is an amazing spread." Like if I was a funder, I'd be like, "This is fantastic.
Yeah.
This is sexy. This is fantastic." But
Yeah,
how do you pitch that to
Yeah.
funders? To
yeah,
say,
yeah.
you're looking at one property, it doesn't look like much, but then you
But that's
show
what I
them,
have.
you show them the finished product at the end, they're like, this is great, you're like, yeah, but there was so much way, but then we were like,
That's awesome. Or there are pieces that don't.
Like this guy in a situation, I had 5 different things, and it was some overlapping, but sometimes. And I find process marketing the key, where you just take a cycle, the cycle is never be different. But if
That
it's
switch.
process marketing,
Flip the
it
switch and
shows
see
where
if it's
overlaps, it show where the legs are, it show where the barrier, it show who you should go after, and it really helps you with your delivery. So if you're saying, for example, you can reach out to your funder and say, okay, I know I had this funding before, not after. right? So funders like to know where the money is coming from, as an example, and that way that's what it hits. But if you say, look, I due for this to you, but this person didn't purchase the property, this, and as a result, this is our money. So I found that process mapping and the timeline, which is the Gantt chart,
Mhm.
that those are tools that can help you to navigate the life cycle.
What do you use?
Well, there's Luda chart, I believe. Visio is one of those that's also out there, but they have too many symbols.
So I use Asana,
Okay,
Monday.com, Asana,
that's something.
Monday.com, other project management platforms, which I think you bring up a good point. But here's I want to have this conversation because it's not about housing or mortgages or whatever. What I heard you talk about, Myrna, are pain points that all organizations deal with around customer behavior as it relates to its impact on performance against the grant. In your case, it's mortgages, people, keeping their credit scores up, keeping qualified for the mortgages for the sake of the example that you gave, right? It's no different in a normal nonprofit environment where you have a person who's enrolled in your program for 6 weeks and has to complete it as a part of your obligations for said funder. I guess my question for you all is, at what point as CEOs do you make the decision to focus on customers who can follow through more than trying to hold on to a customer who's dragging the process on too long?
Hmm.
There are customers inherently by situation or by nature who will take a longer time to complete process X. Your commitment to maintain a slot for this person has a damaging impact on your performance and your numbers. And by nature of our business, we are a highly emotional group of people. We work and lead through our emotions, right? As nonprofit leaders, as staff people, we bleed from the heart for our clients. The problem with that is,
Can you say that again? Because that's exactly like my lesson that I came with this week.
yeah, it's coming from the heart. We compared to our for-profit compadres, we are much more emotional.
Yeah, but what was it? At what point? What did you say?
At what point do you decide? Dang, of course you're gonna ask me to repeat it. At what point do you decide essentially to make a business decision as opposed to an emotional decision? I mean, that's the question. I know. I have to look at the transcript.
Not all customers are good customers.
Right. And
Well, down to,
it does.
the decision that I love Harry to death, but I'm not going down a failure point with Harry.
So with Harry, where do we place Harry in the queue of service? If, and this is the same with construction companies, buyers, enrollees in a workforce development program, folks who are enrolling into a recovery program, folks who are enrolling into a social worker program. It doesn't matter. We have to figure out how to get the maximum results by the committed deadlines we've committed to, while still creating space for those percentages of people who are going to need extra handholding. The concern I've always had in this business working with our clients is that I think we emotionally put our problematic customers ahead of those who are easier to serve, who can get us quicker results. And then we try to backfill at the end of the fiscal year with the better customers.
These are reported, then, but they're not shared with anyone else.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's just within this cohort. So we end up wasting kind of an entire programmatic year instead of doing good business first, performing first, 30/90, while still allowing time for Harry to do his thing. But listen, there has to be a cutoff that says, Harry, if you don't do this by X, we have to give the house to someone else.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't hold on to your mortgage or meet these guidelines or maintain employment or maintain your credit score or save this amount of money or submit this application for this down payment assistance program, we have to, within 45 days, move on. Why? Because the market is still hot, or the mortgage will be lost, or we're gonna start the process all over again, or we're just gonna it's gonna be a 9 month, 12 month process with you. And programmatically, I can't because my money, our performance, our sustainability is tied to this.
Just to be clear, it was not about our customer.
Sure.
It's about the process partner, I'll say, you know?
It's still your customer.
Yeah, no, I understand that. It's like I said, that was the lesson for this week is moving on to find partners that are better versed, driven, all of that to work within what we're doing as well.
Yeah. I mean, and I think to your point, I think you both are saying the same thing. Like we have to make business decisions. Our staff may struggle with it, but as CEOs, like we got to understand our ability to perform is tied to next year's funding in 3 years, 5 years, because it's building trust. That I remember when.
It's also changing behavior.
Yeah,
That's expectation for your phone. And
absolutely.
living up to it, then that person may not be good for your business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we know from our previous presentation that of 10 staff people, 71% of our staff typically is a makeup of other people that do other things. And only 29% of our staff is assigned to fundraising. Because of the limitation of that percentage size, this percentage is responsible for overcoming all these challenges that we just talked about when it comes to proposal writing, grant seeking, revenue generation, etc. In essence, another way of saying this, 29% of our staff is responsible for the sales process. And quite frankly, a lot of our staff, they're not good at the sales process. What is the sales process? Writing grants, building relationships. Everything we just talked about is simply sales. We don't call it that in the nonprofit industry, but it's revenue generation, it's revenue creation, it's all of this. 80% of your money comes from the sales process through proposals. With other organizations, you got donations and bequests and corporation donations, but the bulk of the money is coming through contracts, RFPs. All right. So now we got to think about, wait a minute, if the average nonprofit, and this is from our last presentation, if the average nonprofit has 9.5 employees and only 20%, 29% of those employees exist for fundraising, that's really 1 out of 10. It's tough. 2 out of 10 if we're lucky, right? And that's a stretch because if you have an organization of 10 people, that's your executive director and maybe a part-time grant writer. Or maybe you have enough money to have a full-time grant writer, which means that you're
So,
CEO.
don't even have that.
Right. So it's set.
I know I don't.
So essentially you. And here's the problem with that, right? You're doing the job of 2 or 3 people, which goes back to that chart. There isn't enough time and staff. And so something got to give. Mike, you missed the deadline. Yeah, I also had a board meeting. I also had to cast vision. Also had to design the program. Also had to hold my staff accountable. Also had to do quality assurance. Also had to hire and fire some people. Also had to hook up the computers. Also had to do A/B. I had to sweep the floors today.
But unfortunately, how I combat all of that, unfortunately, and probably many of us are in that same boat, I'm doing things at home on the weekends, which shouldn't be doing. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, I'm writing grants, I'm doing research, doing communications.
And you're still submitting grants 11:59 p.m., right? The reasons for it are legitimate, but it happens. It's not a criticism, it's just a real observation.
I
So
mean, even right now, we're in a busy grant season. A lot of grants coming up that I'm working on. And then even as we discussed, I got a fundraiser coming up, so
how did it go with your board?
it was kind of mixed on it. It's kind of mixed on it, but they like so far how things are going. We're sending out emails
Okay.
and communicate with people. We already got some sponsorships
Cool.
already. So trying to juggle that as well, it's a lot.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm gonna ask the rhetorical question: what is the bottleneck to fundraising? Is it still staff? Right? And I'm curious, after all of that, do you think it's staff? I mean, I just gave you the answer, it's not staff, but it's more complicated than that. Yeah. So here's the cheat code. We'll go over this in our session in May. It's the lack of processes and systems. You hit on it a little earlier, right? If we can build systems and processes to navigate some of the low-hanging fruit stuff that you all talked about, tools, apps, approaches, thought processes, behaviors, yeah, it can change a whole lot. Want to pause there, just any reflections off of what we presented, because that's the end of my presentation before we jump into our work today. Any other reflections on what we talked about?
The challenge with processes and systems, when we're talking about SE funding, is it restricted funding,
Yes.
unrestricted funding? Because restricted funding is for program and activity, doesn't necessarily give you dollars to get to the system that you need to buy Zoom or, because it's not tied. So the challenge is, how do you get unrestricted funding? You have to, not have to, but I've been thinking a lot about it. How do I pursue grants that are unrestricted funded, which is more back to why we're here, because it's capacity building. So who are the funders that will give you money for capacity building that allows you to create that infrastructure and processes that you create?
Yep.
The program side of it doesn't.
So I would tell you, every nonprofit has that same question, right? How many people want to know who the unrestricted funders are? How many people want unrestricted money like today, right? And you multiply that across the state, right? So here's what I tell my clients. They are enigmas, right? Casey and them, they have some flexibility, which is why you're here and how you got here. But those funds are not as robust as you might assume or think. But one of the things I do teach, let me see if I can pull it up here. If I can pull it up, I'll show you this because this is not a part of what we're going to talk about. Okay, it is here. One of the ways you combat this is thinking about how you budget differently, even with restricted funding. In fact, I do believe restricted funding is a huge, huge opportunity. So really quickly, maybe we can talk about this another day. This is a picture of me when I didn't have any hair. I had a bad case of alopecia for 2 years. As a part of that, we were awarded $200,000 from Bank of America. That is one funder that you can pursue for unrestricted dollars, specifically under a program called Neighborhood Builders. Highly competitive on a national level. But if you can get it, which we did, it is unrestricted dollars, 200 grand, might be 250 now. It comes with training as well as that check. But beyond that, I want to show you how to think about budgeting, and then we'll jump into our activity today. One of the things that we talk about in this particular presentation is how to understand your costs. And we utilize a cup of coffee at Starbucks. That $3 cup of coffee really pays for a bunch of stuff. So it pays for marketing, sales, distribution, administration, indirect costs, bonuses for executives, profits for shareholders, all represent 74% of what they are obligated to pay for. And then there are direct costs, which means how much does it cost to make that cup of coffee? Well, it costs 26%. 72 cents to 77 cents. But what does it pay for? I can't even see that. What does it say? 2 shots of espresso, steamed milk, the cup, the lid, the sleeve, the stir, rent, labor, utilities, all of that, right? It goes into how much it costs to do that thing. This should look familiar. This is how the nonprofit dollar is broken down, right? Program expenses makes up the biggest expense of that dollar, then operating expenses, then working capital, fixed expenses, capital growth, reserves, and if you have a line of credit or debt, that's what makes up that last piece. Let me know when you're ready, Yasna. Got it. All right. But now we have to think about, if that's our budget categories, how do we budget our money? In this course, I taught the concept of utilizing restricted revenue to your benefit. All right. So you see here, and I'm going to breeze through this really quickly. You'll be surprised at how much more flexibility you have. So right now you have program A, program B, you got mergers, acquisitions, management, etc., general expenses, fundraising, etc. The executive director, which is what you all hear, your salary, let's say at $50,000, should be split between all of your programs. Now, depending on the size of your organization, obviously you're not going to be spending a lot of time on a lot of your programs. However, 5% here, 7% here, 10% here is reasonable because you're in meetings, you're planning with your staff, you're looking at results. That's 10% of your time, and it can be allocated to program A. So when you're proposing budgets to funders, you should be considerate of the fact that you do spend time in the program. You're not just out here shaking hands and kissing babies, but you do that. Same thing with your assistants and your program directors, your teachers in this case, your bookkeepers, your grant writers. So this is how you creatively budget. One of my favorites, I used to tell this story. We upgraded our technology every year. We got new Macs every year, new iPads every year. One, I'm an IT nerd, right? So we got to do that. But then the question was how? Who's the funder? All my funders paid for it. Well, how do we do that? You don't see it here, but let's just use this for example. Part of the supplies to do a project in the community requires one of these. This is the tool. I got rid of all my copier leases when I was running a nonprofit and bought everybody one of these tools. Why? Email, phone, scan, print, intake, teaching, all of that connected to this little device. Costs, I don't know, let's say $2,000 for this tablet. And everybody got one, whether you're new staff, old staff, and no, I didn't get hand-me-downs. How did you pay for it? It's part of our supplies.
Copier leases? Did I hear you say something?
Yeah, that big copier out there, it's a lease.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, a 5-year, 10-year lease to have that thing sit out there. So we got rid of all that and condensed it down to this because this is how we operated our program off of this device.
May I ask a question, Maggie? You're working with time and effort when you're talking about the CEO.
No, we use Excel spreadsheets that are provided by the grant funder.
Right, but from the executive director, when I put $25,000 in program A,
Mhm.
does that translate to a percentage of my time?
It does. So it depends on your salary. You can be technical and use time and efforts, or you can just use a rule of thumb. Now, if you're saying I spend 75% of my time in program A and you're a big organization, red flag, right? It's very situational. Before I left CRI, we would write Scott in for 3 to 5%. We were like a $10 million organization at the time. It grew to 16 million after I left, right? It's reasonable that he spends 5% of his time at a salary of $150,000 on program A and program B and program C, right? But if we said he spent 50% of his time on this program, it's a red flag, especially when you have a large staff. It's a problem. But at the end of the day, to answer your question about how to get technology, how to get applications, how to get A, B, and C, supplies. Sometimes there's a line item for technology if the funder allows it. And then where a lot of people struggle is not here on this template, is admin costs, admin fees that pays for HR and your accountant, etc. Right. So this is where this goes. Most funders may not give you the space for that. But what's interesting, depending on your program, depending on what it is, if you have a housing program and your accountant manages the distribution of funds, down payment money, for the sake of argument, it's reasonable to write that person into the program while he's also managing the books of the organization overall. Right. Um,
Sorry. What if you already had the money set aside and then you get a grant?
what about it?
That doesn't increase their salary. Is that just kicking it down the road so that way you have an extended?
No, it doesn't increase salary. It allocates the money that you're getting. So if there's pre-existing money, let's say 100 grand in the bank from a previous program project, if and I know where you're going with this, but if those funds have been reported on and then it's been satisfied, it's just funds sitting there. It's surplus. It's money that's just there. But we're talking about new grants. We're talking about new opportunities. We're talking about new revenue. So whatever that is or was, if it's been settled with previous funders and the funds have been left over because there was no staff, no expenses to speak of, or they were given permission to just keep the funds and use it for other purposes, it's not a conversation I'm having right now.
So would you consider that a reserve
It could be.
profit?
It-
That's a whole different
it
topic.
could be.
Some questions on that, but how do you build reserve out of this type of, restricted funding?
It depends
You
on,
do need some reserve somewhere.
we need reserves all the time, but it depends upon the relationship with the funder. Now, some funders, and you have two funders down there, some funders are extremely strict. They want you to spend everything. But if you have a portfolio of funders and some are not as strict and you have leftover resources where we're supposed to hire 5 people, we only hire 4, run out of time, right? Or we had a budget of $28,000 for supplies, but we only spent 22. Most good funders may not ask for the money back. That builds into the reserve pile. Most funders are not going to allow you to fund reserves here, right? So you're going to have to be creative and strategic with that. Does that make sense, Casey? Right. Right. You guys are pretty flexible, right? From a list perspective, list Connecticut. Right.
Not as flexible.
Right.
And we'll get develop case where your is our letting our responsibility. So.
Yeah.
PJ.
Low hanging fruit, right? And the distinction she made, the difference between HUD monies, which is restrictive, versus JP Morgan money, which is flexible. It's situational. And I think this goes back to where we started too. Having a relationship with your funder to understand what the restrictions are or are not. Some stuff she can probably tell you over a cup of coffee, some stuff she would never write in an email. Right? Right? So it's very situational. But to your point, Beverly, that's how you pay for technology. That's how you pay for new apps. Also notice rent. You need to pay rent, not the whole thing from a grant, but you need to write it into your expenses, your utilities. It's part of the program. We host meetings here, so we got to pay for the lights and the heat and the gas and the security, etc. So all that stuff should be allocated in here. Does that help? All right. Other questions?